Once each year the earth grows cold and the fields fall silent, and once each year they wake again in green. For thousands of years people looked at that cycle and asked why the world seemed to die and return, season after season, without fail. This is the story they told to answer it, a story about a mother's grief, powerful enough to starve the world, a god who ruled a kingdom no one wanted to visit, and a young woman who became something far greater in the underworld than she was ever permitted to become in the sun. This is the story of Hades and Persephone. If you enjoy stories like this one, consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so the next one finds you the moment it's ready. Persephone is born to Zeus, king of the gods, and Demeter, goddess of the harvest and of everything that grows from the soil of the earth. From the moment of her birth, Demeter guards her daughter with a devotion rare even among gods who are, by nature, possessive of what belongs to them. She raises Persephone apart from the wider, harder world, away from the sea's dangers, away from the endless wars fought among mortals and gods alike, and especially far from any knowledge of the world of the dead, a realm Demeter never once speaks of in her daughter's presence, as though refusing to name it might keep it from ever touching her child at all. Persephone grows up surrounded by sunlit meadows and cultivated fields, her days measured by the same gentle rhythms that govern growing things, planting, blooming, harvest, rest, and planting again. She becomes, in time, a goddess associated entirely with spring itself. Wildflowers seem to bloom more fully wherever she walks. Fields she favours resist the dying colours of autumn a little longer than fields she has never visited. She spends her hours in the company of nymphs, companions given to her by Demeter specifically to keep her close, watched and safe, gathering blossom, singing together in open meadows, weaving crowns of narcissus and violet, living a life defined entirely by light, warmth, and growth. She remains, well into young adulthood, almost entirely unaware of how deliberately her mother has shaped the world around her in order to keep her that way. Hades, in the meantime, rules a very different kind of kingdom, one built on an entirely different foundation. He is one of three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades himself, sons of the Titans Cronus and Rhea, born into a generation of gods that first had to overthrow their own father before they could claim anything at all. When the three brothers succeeded in that rebellion and divided the newly won cosmos between them, the sky went to Zeus, the sea went to Poseidon, and the underworld, drawn by lot, not chosen out of cruelty, ambition, or punishment, fell to Hades. He rules the realm of the dead with a fairness that borders on the mechanical, offering neither cruelty nor unearned mercy to the souls that pass into his keeping, honouring the balance of his kingdom the way his brothers honour the sky and the sea. But his kingdom is one that no living soul enters by choice, and no fellow god visits at all, not even out of curiosity. Of the three brothers who divided the world between them, Hades alone rules in near total isolation. Powerful beyond nearly any being in existence, and entirely alone in a way Zeus and Poseidon, surrounded always by companions, worshippers, and constant divine business, never once have to experience. Centuries pass this way, Hades presiding over the dead in his vast, colourless halls, until the day he first sees Persephone. Long before Persephone ever sets foot in the meadow that changes her life, Hades has already fallen in love with her, though not through any meeting between them and not through any choice of his own making. Aphrodite, goddess of love, notices that her power reaches into every corner of the world. The sky bows to it, the sea bows to it, even mortal hearts bow to it without exception. Only the underworld, ruled by a god who has spent centuries in solitude, remains entirely untouched by love. Aphrodite decides this will not continue and sends her son Eros to correct it. Eros finds Hades on one of the rare occasions the god of the dead rises above his own kingdom, standing at the edge of the upper world, surveying the boundary between his domain and the living one above it. Eros draws his bow and lets an arrow fly, and in that same instant, Hades' eyes fall on Persephone, in the distance, gathering flowers in a sunlit meadow with her companions, entirely unaware that she is being watched at all. It is enough. Hades, who has ruled for centuries without once wanting for company, finds himself consumed by a longing he has never experienced before and does not know how to set aside. He does not approach her directly. He does not send word to her or attempt to court her the way a god might honestly court a woman he hopes to win. Instead, he goes to Zeus, Persephone's father, and asks for her hand in marriage, a request settled entirely between two gods in a single conversation, without a single word ever reaching Demeter or Persephone herself. Zeus, unwilling to openly oppose his own brother, but equally unwilling to face Demeter's fury directly, gives his consent quietly, and offers Hades nothing beyond that consent, no introduction, no courtship, no honest path to winning her above ground. If Hades wants her, Zeus makes clear, without saying so outright, he will have to take her himself. On the day everything changes, Persephone walks through a meadow thick with narcissus, crocus, deep violet blossoms, hyacinth, and wild climbing roses, the air heavy with the particular warmth of early summer, bees moving lazily between open petals, her companions scattered nearby gathering armfuls of colour to weave into crowns and garlands. She reaches for a single pale narcissus blossom growing slightly apart from the others, at the very edge of the meadow where the grass gives way to looser, darker soil. She has no way of knowing that Zeus has already granted Hades permission to take her as his wife, a decision reached entirely between the two gods, discussed and settled, without a single word to Demeter, without a single word to Persephone herself. It is, in every sense, a decision made about her rather than with her, the kind of arrangement gods make between themselves when they assume the world will simply accommodate whatever they decide. The ground splits open beneath her without warning. A sound, like the earth itself groaning under some enormous pressure finally giving way. From the widening chasm rises a chariot drawn by immortal black horses, their eyes and manes catching a strange, cold light that belongs to no sun Persephone has ever known. Hades himself rises with them, crowned and utterly commanding, and reaches for her before she has any time at all to understand what is happening to her. She is pulled down into the earth, her cries swallowed almost instantly beneath the closing ground, the meadow settling back into a stillness so complete that moments later nothing above the surface shows any sign that anything at all has occurred. A water nymph named Cyane, close enough to witness the chasm opening, throws herself directly into the chariot's path, desperate to stop what she's watching unfold. Hades does not slow for her, does not so much as acknowledge her presence as the chariot passes through the space where she stands. Cyane, overwhelmed entirely by grief and by her own complete helplessness to have prevented what she has just seen happen to someone she cared for, dissolves into the waters of her own spring, unable to bear the weight of having failed at the one single thing she tried to do. Demeter searches for her daughter across the whole of the earth, disguising herself as an aging mortal woman wrapped in plain grey cloth, refusing food, refusing rest, moving from village to village and asking every stranger she passes whether they have seen a young woman answering to her daughter's description. Hecate, goddess of the crossroads and of the quiet magic that moves between worlds, joins her before long, walking beside her through village after village, carrying a torch to light the way through nights that never seem to end. Days pass in this manner, then more days still. Eventually, Helios, the sun god who watches everything that happens beneath him as he crosses the sky in his own great chariot, tells Demeter the truth she has been searching for, that Hades has taken Persephone down into the underworld, and that Zeus himself knew of it, consented to it, and said nothing. What Demeter feels upon learning this is no longer simple grief. It hardens into something closer to fury, directed as much at Zeus's silence as at Hades' action. She withdraws entirely from her duties as goddess of the harvest, abandoning the field she has tended since the beginning of the world. Crops wither where they stand. The ground hardens, cracks, and refuses to yield anything at all, no matter how it is worked or watered. What was, only weeks earlier, a world thick with growing things becomes barren and cold within a matter of days. Mortals and gods alike beginning to starve as the earth simply stops producing, refusing to grow so much as a single blade of grass, until Demeter's daughter is returned to her. Temples fall quiet. Offerings go uneaten. Even the other gods begin to feel the weight of a hunger they have never once had to consider before. Deep below the world Persephone is always known, in a kingdom lit by pale, colourless light and filled with a silence unlike anything above ground, Persephone finds herself made queen of a realm she never once asked to rule. The underworld is not, in this telling, the realm of fire and torment that later ages would imagine it to be. Much of it is the asphodel meadows, a vast quiet plain stretching in every direction, where ordinary souls dwell after death, neither punished nor rewarded for the lives they lived, simply existing in pale stillness, beneath a sky that never brightens into morning and never darkens into true night. In the beginning, Persephone speaks to no one. She sits in the great hall Hades offers her, refusing food, refusing his company, mourning a life she cannot yet imagine ever returning to. Hades does not force conversation, does not demand her gratitude or her affection. He simply waits, and while he waits, he begins, quietly and without announcement, to change his own kingdom around her. He starts with light. The pale, colourless glow of the underworld begins to warm, wherever Persephone walks, into something closer to dawn than dusk. Groves of flowers, unlike anything found on the surface, begin to grow along the banks of the underworld's rivers. Blossoms that hold their own soft luminance rather than reflecting a sun that never reaches this deep, glowing, faintly gold and silver in colours. No living garden above ground has ever produced. He has the pale stone halls threaded through with veins of gold, and opens wide terraces overlooking the asphodel meadows, so that even here, in a kingdom built entirely for the dead, there is something resembling a garden. He learns slowly and by careful observation, rather than by asking her directly, what she misses most. When he notices her lingering near the sound of moving water, he diverts a channel of the underworld's rivers to run silver and clear past her private terrace, filling the silence with a sound closer to a mountain stream than anything a kingdom of the dead should reasonably contain. When he notices her watching birds that occasionally wander too far into the deeper caverns, he has his own dark, gentle creatures tamed and brought to her. Not birds, since none can survive so far below, but soft-eyed hounds and quiet, watchful owls, creatures of night rather than day, offered as companions rather than curiosities. He gives her a throne of her own beside his, carved separately, not simply a smaller copy of his seat of power, but a true seat of equal authority, and begins gradually involving her in the judgments and decisions of his kingdom rather than keeping her apart from his rule entirely. Souls who pass before them see, for the first time in the underworld's long history, a queen listening as carefully as the king beside her. He speaks to her plainly, without the flattery gods so often offer mortals and lesser beings, treating her intelligence as something to be consulted rather than managed. Slowly, across seasons she has no way yet of counting, her silence softens into conversation, and her conversation, in time, softens into something neither of them names aloud at first. It is into this half-transformed kingdom, warmer now, threaded with gold and quiet water, tended by creatures gentled specifically for her, that Hades finally offers her the fruit of his own realm, a pomegranate, its skin deep red, its seeds glistening like garnets. When it is finally split open, Persephone eats some of them, no longer entirely unaware, and by this point no longer entirely unwilling, of the ancient law that binds anyone who eats the food of the underworld to return to it, again and again, for as long as they live and long after. A gardener named Ascalaphus, tending the pale groves nearby, happens to witness her eating the seeds, and later reports exactly what he saw to anyone who asks. It seems, at the moment it happens, like a small and almost meaningless detail, and stating, a servant noticing a small act in a quiet garden, it will determine the entire remaining shape of Persephone's existence. With the earth dying in earnest, and both mortals and gods beginning to suffer under the full weight of Demeter's grief, Zeus finds he can no longer ignore the consequences of a decision he made without ever imagining it would cost this much. He sends word to the underworld demanding that Persephone be returned to the surface, to her mother, and to the world that depends on her mother's goodwill to survive at all. But Ascalaphus's report of the pomegranate seeds complicates everything that follows. Having eaten the fruit of the underworld, even a handful of seeds, Persephone cannot simply leave that world behind forever. She is bound now by the same ancient law that governs every soul who has ever tasted what grows in Hades' kingdom. There is no version of this story where that debt can simply be forgiven or ignored, not even by Zeus himself. Zeus brokers the only compromise the situation will allow. Persephone will spend part of each year below, in the underworld, as Hades' wife and queen, walking among the luminous groves he built specifically to make his kingdom bearable for her. The remainder of the year, she returns to the surface, to sunlight, to meadows thick with wildflowers, to her mother's fierce and unbroken love. When she rises each year from the underworld, Demeter's joy at her return floods back into the earth, and spring spreads outward across the world in her daughter's footsteps. When the appointed time comes for Persephone to descend once more, Demeter's grief returns just as reliably as her joy did, and the earth grows cold and still again until her daughter comes home the following year. This is not, in the version of the story told here, an ending built purely on loss and captivity. Persephone descends now each year as a queen who rules a kingdom entirely her own, standing beside a god who chose her deliberately, who reshaped his own realm around her comfort rather than simply expecting her to endure it, and who continues, across the centuries, to treat her as an equal partner in his realm rather than simply a prize once seized and then discarded. The story that begins in violence, in a mother's ignorance and a father's indifference, settles slowly over the passing of many years into something closer to genuine partnership, imperfect, born from an act that neither woman nor mother ever consented to in the beginning, but real and lasting by the time the seasons finally find their rhythm. For the ancient Greeks, this was never simply a myth told for its own entertainment. It became the foundation of the Eleusinian mysteries, one of the most significant religious rites of the ancient world, built directly around Demeter's grief, Persephone's descent into darkness, and the promise that the Underworld is not, in the end, where every story has to stop. Every spring when the fields turned green again after a long, dead winter, this myth was the reason ancient people believed the world was capable of returning to life year after year without fail. If you enjoy stories like this one, subscribe to Mythology and Legends and turn on the notification bell so the next one finds you the moment it's ready. Which myth would you like told next? Leave it in the comments below. Thank you for listening to the tale of Hades and Persephone, and we'll see you again soon.